Would you ever take that picture down? She's embarrassed me.
That's something.
Hey, you should see the one if you put it up now, you'll be embarrassed.
Normally before I come in here on the Tuesday, kind of for a day or two, I kind of get some idea of what I want to do, because when you're telling stories, the one thing you've got to do is remember the lies that you're telling, because someone will surely have heard it before and they'll trip you up in that. Now, I've had a kind of a busy or emotional week, so I haven't had time to do that. So I basically have to tell you the truth tonight. Anyway, some time ago, my niece decided she'd go into this family research business, you know, kind of see where, not that I give a damn where we came from, there are skeletons in every closet, and she's gone down different branches of the family, and now she's kind of starting with my side. And she came down to me recently and she said, I've come across a strange thing. She said, your grandfather and your grandmother had the same surname and the same address before they got married. And she couldn't figure that out. Now, you'll follow this eventually. But now I've got to take you back to 1849 in Aglish in County Waterford, where my great-grandfather lived. And this was just kind of the first year kind of when we were coming out of the Great Famine. And they said he was a small farmer, but as far as I know, he was about 6'3", so he wasn't that small. And there's a kind of a sad element to this as well. He was walking into Aglish one morning in 1949. Now, there was a travelling man by the name of John O'Driscoll who used to come around doing work for farmers in Aglish around that time. And he used to come with his wife and 2 small children. And the way travellers lived in those times, they'd kind of upend the horse cart so that it had a slope like that, and then make kind of a tent around it. It was pretty basic living. Now, the kind of kernel of this story is that the fact that we never know who we are. And 1/4 of my DNA is traveller. So you don't know who you're talking to in Ireland. Anyway, he was, as I say, he was walking into Aglish and he heard a child crying, and really crying, and it kind of upset him. And he went over to this camp that just John O'Driscoll had, and he pulled back the old canvas that was around it. And what he saw really surprised him. There was a baby in a little kind of Moses basket thing, sitting on the axle of the cart, which was a bit higher. There were 2 adults and a little boy sleeping on the ground, but they were dead. What had happened was, during the night, the fire that was outside the tent had smouldered, and what we now know to be carbon dioxide gas had gone in on the ground and suffocated them. He thought the little boy was still breathing, and a friend of his came along just at the right time with a pony and trap. They bundled the baby and the little boy into that. They left the parents, they were dead, there was nothing they could do for them. And they brought them the 11 miles from Aglish into Youghal to the doctor. That'll give you an idea of the way things changed. The doctor tried, but the little boy was dead also. And it was just this little girl who was probably about 2 years of age. And the doctor said, well, she'll have to go to the workhouse. And my grandfather, who seemingly was a man in Aglish that you didn't argue with for various reasons, knew the conditions in the workhouse, because this was famine times and it wasn't a nice place to go. He said, she'll go nowhere near it, I'll take her home. And at the time, he had one son himself, Pat Fenton, who at this stage was about 7 or 8, and they had no other children. So he took this little girl home in the kind of hopes that eventually the authorities would do something, which in those days they didn't. And she continued to live on with them. Now, Pat Fenton, his son, grew up when he was about 14 or 15. He ran away from home, joined the British Army, ended up in Ceylon, in India, and eventually in some battle somewhere, it was said that he lost the leg. What he said himself, he didn't lose it, a bloody cannonball blew it clean out from under him. And he came home in his early 20s with an artificial leg and moved back in home and started farming with his father. But a strange thing, he fell in love with this Ellen, who was now living in the house with his parents. And I tell you, the Sunday morning that the banns were read in Aglish Church, that Ellen Driscoll Fenton was going to marry Pat Fenton of Aglish, County Waterford. There was some gossip in the parish that day. But again, my grandfather and my great-grandfather were men you didn't argue with in those days. They got married and had 3 children, one of them being my mother. My mother left home around 1937, no, sorry, about 35, moved from Agnish to Newmarket to Mallow where she met my father. They got married. And in 1939, January 1939, they got married. By February of 1939, she was expecting her first child. And like Kate Middleton across the water, she got extremely ill. She could not keep any food down. No matter how she tried, nothing worked. Eventually she got weaker and weaker and she couldn't even get out of bed. A doctor was called and eventually she got so weak the doctor told my father that he had best go down to Agnish and get my mother's parents because she would only last another couple of days. She was dehydrating at a ferocious rate. My father borrowed a car from a friend of his in Mallow and drove from Mallow to Agnish to bring this sad news to his new parents-in-law. He said himself, not an easy journey. He went into the kitchen and he told them straight away. He just couldn't keep it. He had to tell them. And he said he would always remember his mother-in-law's first words. He said, not a bother, she's a fine strapping lass, she'll survive this. Sit down there and wait, I'll do something. Now my grandmother, even though she had grown up in a settled family in Agnish, had this strange ability that lots of people have in the countryside, where she would get herbs, weeds, berries, all sorts of things, and grind them up. She'd make poultices, all sorts of cures for all sorts of ailments, ailments that didn't even exist. She'd make cures for them. And my father said she pulled her shawl up over her head, went out the back door with her basket, came back about a half an hour later with what he said were weeds. Put them into a pestle mortar and ground them up. Looked at my grandfather who was sitting beside the fire and told him to go out to the shed and bring in the linseed oil. Now as far as I know, linseed oil is used for putty, but he brought it in and she put a couple of drops of that into it and mixed it all up. Put it all into a muslin, tied it in a knot, sat it into a cup and floated the cup on a saucepan of hot water over the fire. About an hour later, my father was mad anxious to get back to Mallow, to his wife, who we figured he was told by the medical profession was dying. My grandmother got this bag and he said she began to twist it and squeeze it, and he said what came out of it, he said, was like one long green continuous sticky snot. And she squeezed and squeezed until she got it all out, put it into a bottle, which was probably a Guinness bottle, tied a little bit of cloth over the top of a piece of string, gave it to him, told him go home, put it into a saucepan of water, and when it got kind of runny again, if she couldn't take a spoonful of it, to keep putting it on her lips, because she said, like a cat, she would lick it. He got back to Mallow, and he had great respect for his mother-in-law, and he did this. And my mother at this stage was probably on her way out completely at that stage. But he did this, and he sat up all night, and the next morning she was worse. By the following evening, she wasn't much better, and he really thought nothing is going to work. The doctor was there, priest was called, and a couple of hours later, she opened her eyes, and she said, Bill, I'd love a cup of tea. And he brought her the tea. And when he brought the tea, she said, I'd love a finger of toast with that. And obviously, because I'm here, she survived. On the 1st of September of 1939, my brother was born the same day that Hitler invaded Poland. He invaded the world, each with disastrous effects. He's now living in America, he's 74. My mother lived until she was 89, and she had 2 more children. But it makes you wonder about people's past and their DNA. But what makes me wonder is, what concoction of herbs did that woman mix up that day in Agnish? And where did she ever get it? Because the link with her and travelling had been broken. But there are strange things in every family. So if you go researching your family history, be very careful out there. You don't know what you're going to find. We're a meal, Margaret.